Hi there. So this is Alex, and I'm going to be discussing my topic of identity and language learning. So pretty much in relation to L2 acquisition, identity is essentially how learners view themselves within their L2 versus their L1. This can be related to many different factors, including their gender, their nationality, what particular cultures they subscribe to, their social situation, age, and even their language ability. Um, Language learner agency also plays a role, and basically whether or not the language learners are at a point in their language development where they can actively make decisions towards their use of language. So, in the following articles, you're going to see some examples of all of these topics come up. So, one of the first articles that I looked at was called Peer Socialization into Gendered L2 Mandarin Practices in a Studied Abroad Context. So what this article looked at was what are referred to as effective sentence final particles, or ASPs, in L2 Mandarin use. So for those of you who don't know, Mandarin has they're called ASPs. They're kind of like what we would refer to as intonation in English. They're sounds that reflect meaning at the end of sentences, kind of the best way that I can think to explain them. So there are ones that are related to the genders of male and female. And so the ones that we are looking at here are considered to be gendered as female ASPs. In Chinese culture, women are expected to identify as kind of subservient and dainty, and the ASPs being looked at in this study are ones that women often use to express weakness or seem infantile almost. So for the study, there were 3 participants, and they were each placed with a same gender local Mandarin speaking Chinese partner in Shanghai, China. The participants were all college students they were American, and they all had pretty high Mandarin speaking abilities. So over the course of the study, it was found that the female participant, her ASP went up dramatically, from a rate of using 0 ASPs and not really even recognizing their existence to using them pretty consistently. What's funny here is that also her partner, her use of ASPs went down, which kind of shows me that while the American female student kind of adopted part of the dainty feminine identity of a Chinese woman in her speaking, her local partner also kind of adopted more of the assertive American view towards femininity. The male usage consistently went down. Now, there was one thing that happened in this study that I thought was interesting. And for part of it, one of the local males had his girlfriend with him. And it was recorded in their conversations that while she was around, his ASP usage rose dramatically. And then as soon as she left, it dropped back down to a rate of 0. So this got me thinking. When I speak Mandarin, I use a lot of ASPs. I am frequently told by local Chinese people that I sound a little gay when I speak Chinese. And I've always related this to that most of my speaking practice is with women and children. So it got me wondering what the results of the study would have been if the participants had been partnered with the opposite gender. Um, my thinking is that maybe the reason why when the guy's girlfriend was around, his ASP usage went up was because he wanted to be cute and playful. So I would hypothesize that if the genders had been partnered with opposites, that we would have seen the males have higher ASP usage, while the female participant probably wouldn't have developed any, maybe. So another one of the articles that I've looked at is called Never Quite a Native Speaker. And it looks at identity within the context of second language and a second culture. So this is the author's Marks, her personal account of her time studying abroad in Germany, a period of time that was originally supposed to be only 6 months, but then eventually rose to over 3 years. And she basically breaks her identity and language speaking down into 6 phases, which is kind of kicked off for when she is first assimilating herself into her new environment. She's often mistaken for an American. And she starts making conscious efforts in her speaking of German to not be mistaken for an American. And this is interesting for me because I've met many Canadians while being abroad, and this is something that they all say, is that they can't stand it when they are mistaken for Americans. And it's further kind of interesting for me because while my sister was studying abroad in Europe, she would frequently assimilate or adopt the identity of a Canadian when she would like go out to bars and whatnot, so that she didn't have to worry about any prejudice towards American politics, stuff like that. So I would like to see more of these kind of accounts of people relating their nationality while abroad and efforts that they make to either have their nationality really prominent, or if other people adopt different nationalities while abroad. This kind of anecdotal evidence is interesting and would be cool to kind of compare. So this study, Gender Differences in Identity and Acculturation Patterns, what it did was it examined native-like accents of Kurdish people while speaking Turkish. So I actually didn't know this going into the article, but there's a minority group that resides in predominantly Eastern Turkey, I think, of what are called Kurdish. And I guess there's a lot of fighting between Kurds and Turks. It's kind of mentioned in the article. It's not really all that relevant here. But basically, the study had both girl and boy participants, ages 13 to 18, and it was looking to see which ones had more native-like accents while speaking Turkish. And the results were that girls were significantly more likely to have developed a native-like accent. And it was kind of narrowed down to that this was due to their socialization patterns, and that for some reason in Eastern Turkey, these public school student girls are more likely to have closer relationships with the Turks than the boys are. And I just thought this was interesting. The study didn't really say anything about it, relating like what it is in the culture that might cause this. But I'd like to see the same sort of study done in other um, contexts. I think that would be interesting. So this one I really enjoyed, and I found myself with a lot of questions at the end. It's language learner investment and identity negotiation. And what it did was it had a group of Koreans, um, who had studied or worked abroad for a significant period of time in an English speaking country, and they had developed a really high English proficiency, and then returned back to South Korea. And even though it's seen as a very desirable thing to have high English proficiency in Korean culture, it's actually kind of a burden for these people to have this English proficiency, because it's more difficult for them to fit in their local communities, and the high level of English makes them kind of stand out. Um, they reported that even while speaking Korean, a lot of locals would say, you don't speak Korean the same way that I do. Why is this?" So they have to use a lot of language user agency to come up with ways to make their English seem less good when speaking English with people, with other Koreans, or when they're talking on the phone in English in public. They don't want people to hear them speaking really good English. Um, and it was just interesting to me. And it got me thinking, like, so if having high English proficiency for Koreans is actually kind of a show-offy thing in their culture, and they hide it, I wonder what, like, how an American would be viewed if he had a high level of Korean and was living in Korea. Like, would he be seen as show-offy for speaking really good Korean, or would he be praised for it? And then I was also thinking, like, what about here in America? If there was an American engaging with the Korean community here in the States, what would the preferred language be? How would they communicate in English? Would they prefer to communicate in Korean? These are a lot of questions that I wouldn't mind seeing answered. And real quick, I know I've gone a bit over about 10 minutes. I wanted to add this one in. This one, Constructing Identity with L2, looks at the language situation in Norway. And the language situation in Norway, and I didn't know this going into this article, is pretty interesting, where they do not have a set national dialect of Norwegian. There are a couple of accepted dialects. One is more primarily used for writing, while one is more primarily used for speaking, but they can both be used for each, and there's no set one. And English is overly prominent and is taught compulsory all through school. And so it examines which type of English Norwegians prefer and identify with between General American English, or Gen M, and received pronunciation, which is British English. So received pronunciation is what is taught to them in school. But, American media has become incredibly prominent. Like, even the other night, I went to watch the new Avengers game and the new Avengers movie, and I was sitting there in the theater thinking, I was watching these movies in China in packed auditoriums, and now here I am in America in a packed auditorium watching the same movie. And I know my friends in Europe are in the exact same situation I am. And so I'm thinking about what a global phenomenon this little bit of American initiated culture has become all throughout the world. Um, and so essentially what the study found was that Norwegians find English to be much more fashion, or American English to be much more fashionable. Um, Pretty much because it's what they hear on TV and at the movies. Whereas they see received pronunciation as being much more academic and professional. And I pretty much relate this to that it's because that's what they learn in school. It sounds academic to them. It sounds academic to me. People sound smarter when they speak with a British accent. Um, and it was also interesting because overwhelmingly the participants speak more closely with an American accent than they do with the British pronunciation, which kind of tells me that, yeah, they're learning English in school, but then they're going home and watching a lot of TV and having their accents changed. Um, so, yeah, if anybody actually watches this, I hope maybe you learned something. I've been researching identity, and there's a lot of different things that go into it. So, hope everyone has an easy ride to the end of the semester and have a good summer.